The Pentagon's meeting room 347 had never felt more cramped. Major James Anderson straightened his dress blues, acutely aware of the 7-foot-tall alien warrior standing before him. Krathax of the Vorkath Dominion towered over everyone present, their iridescent battle armor reflecting the fluorescent lights in dancing patterns across the walls. "Your species seems," Krathax's translator hummed, "rather small for warriors." The alien's 4 eyes blinked in an unsynchronized pattern, a sign of dismissiveness in their culture. Anderson had been prepared for this. 20 years in the Marine Corps, 3 tours in combat zones, and 6 months of sinological training had led to this moment. "Size isn't everything in combat," he replied evenly, "as I'm sure you'll come to understand." The alien's upper right eye twitched. Around their neck hung a chain of metal shards. Each one, Anderson had been briefed, represented a world that had fallen to Vorkath military might. 47 pieces clinked together as Krathax moved. "We have reviewed your planet's current military capabilities," Krathax continued, their massive clawed hand gesturing to the holographic display of Earth's defense systems. "Primitive, but intriguing. Perhaps in a few centuries, you'll develop something truly formidable." Lieutenant Emily Hayes, standing near the back of the room, couldn't suppress a small smile. As the Pentagon's leading military historian, she knew what was coming. The Vorkath had done their research on current Earth technology, but they hadn't bothered to look back. The meeting proceeded with standard diplomatic protocols, exchange of military honors, discussion of joint training exercises, and the usual posturing that came with first contact scenarios. But everything changed during the demonstration. In the Pentagon's secure training facility, Krathax had agreed to show their species' combat prowess. The alien warrior moved with incredible speed, their 4 arms wielding different weapons simultaneously. They took on 5 Special Forces operators in hand-to-hand combat, moving like a deadly whirlwind of blade and bone. "Impressive," Anderson commented as the demonstration ended. The Special Forces team was bruised but not seriously injured. Krathax had shown restraint, another form of boasting. "Would you care to see some of our combat techniques?" "If you insist," Krathax replied, their tone dripping with condescension. "Though I doubt your limited forms could teach the Vorkath anything new about warfare." Anderson nodded to Hayes, who stepped forward with a tablet. "Before we begin our demonstration, perhaps you'd like to know more about our military history. Context is important for understanding combat evolution." Krathax's upper arms crossed in what the briefing documents had described as a gesture of superior amusement. "Very well. Tell me of your greatest campaign. How many worlds have you conquered?" "Actually," Hayes said, her voice carrying a hint of something that made Anderson hide a smile, "we thought we'd start with a little conflict called World War II, just one planet involved, but I think you'll find the scale interesting. A single-planet conflict." All 4 of Krathax's eyes blinked simultaneously, a sign of confusion. "Hardly seems worth mentioning." Anderson watched as Hayes pulled up the first image, a photograph of the Normandy landing. Krathax's lower arms uncrossed as they leaned forward, their head tilting at an angle. "What kind of formation is this?" the alien asked, their voice losing some of its earlier condescension. "That's just the beginning," Hayes replied, swiping to the next image. "This operation involved over 4,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and nearly 2 million personnel. And this was just one battle, on one beach, on one day, in one theater, of a war that spanned 6 years and involved most of our planet." For the first time since their arrival, Krathax was silent. Their trophy chain clinked softly as they leaned even closer to the images, all 4 eyes wide open now. "Perhaps," Anderson said quietly, "we should continue this discussion over dinner. We have a lot of history to cover, and this is just the opening chapter." Krathax straightened up slowly, looking at the humans in the room with what could only be described as growing unease. "Yes," they said, their translator unable to hide a slight tremor in their voice. "I believe I would like to learn more." The first crack in their armor of superiority had appeared, and both Anderson and Hayes knew this was just the beginning. The officers' club at Fort Bragg had been cleared for the evening, save for a small group gathered around a large oak table. Krathax sat awkwardly in a reinforced chair, their battle armor gleaming under the warm lighting. Major Anderson and Lieutenant Hayes sat across from them, while several other military officials occupied the remaining seats. "Your eternal campaign against the Nexus Empire," Hayes said, taking a sip of water. "You mentioned it lasted 3 solar cycles." Krathax's upper arms gestured in a sweeping motion, a sign of pride. "The greatest campaign in Vorkath history. 3 full cycles of continuous combat, 47 worlds brought under our banner. No other species has matched such military efficiency." Anderson watched as Hayes maintained her composed expression, though he caught the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. She'd been waiting for this moment all evening. 3 solar cycles, Hayes repeated thoughtfully. "That would be about 5 Earth years, correct?" "Yes," Krathax confirmed, their trophy chain rattling as they reached for their own drink. "A special mixture designed for their biology. An unprecedented duration for a single campaign." Hayes pulled out her tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen. "I'm curious, then. How did your warriors handle the generational shifts in command?" All 4 of Krathax's eyes focused on her. "Generational shifts." "Yes. In extended conflicts, different generations of leaders must take command as the war progresses. How did your species handle that transition over the 5 years?" The alien warrior's lower arms gripped the edge of the table. There were no transitions. The same warriors who began the campaign saw it through to its end. Why would we need different generations for 5 years of combat? Anderson leaned forward. "Lieutenant Hayes is our foremost expert on military history. Perhaps you'd be interested in hearing about some of our extended conflicts." "Very well," Krathax said, their tone still carrying that edge of superiority, though slightly dulled from earlier. "Tell me of your longest campaign." Hayes set her tablet down carefully. "Well, there's the 100 Years' War." Krathax's translator must have malfunctioned. All 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "Repeat that." "The 100 Years' War," Hayes said clearly, though the name is actually a bit misleading. It lasted 116 years, from 1337 to 1453. The alien warriors' upper arms dropped to their sides, a sign of disbelief or shock, according to their cultural briefing. That's impossible. No species could maintain a war for over a century." "Would you like to see the historical records?" Hayes asked, already pulling up authenticated documents on her tablet. "We have extensive documentation, including battle plans, strategic analyses, and personal accounts from multiple generations of soldiers and leaders." Krathax's clawed hand trembled slightly as they took the tablet, their eyes scanning the information with increasing intensity. "This can't be. How did you? The resources required, the strategic planning. And that's not even our longest conflict," Anderson added casually, watching as Krathax's head snapped up to look at him. "Just one of the better-known ones." The trophy chain around Krathax's neck suddenly seemed to weigh heavier. Their lower arms unconsciously reached up to touch it, as if reassuring themselves of their own accomplishments. "Your species," Krathax said slowly, "fought a single war for over a century. How many worlds were conquered?" "None," Hayes replied. "This was another single-planet conflict, primarily between 2 nations on Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the other military officials at the table had stopped eating to watch the exchange. "I think," Krathax finally said, their voice uncharacteristically quiet, "I need to know more. Not just about this war, but about all of them. How many extended conflicts has your species engaged in? Hayes and Anderson exchanged a look. Perhaps we should start with something simpler, Hayes suggested. Would you like to learn about the concept of world wars first? World wars. Croffax repeated the term, as if tasting something foreign. You mean planetary civil conflicts? Not exactly, Anderson said, nodding to Hayes to pull up the next set of historical documents. Lieutenant, why don't you explain to our guest how humanity managed to fight a war across every continent simultaneously, twice, in the span of 3 decades? The trophy chain clinked once more as Croffax leaned forward, their previous confidence now tinged with something new. The West Point Military Museum was silent save for the soft hum of Croffax's translator and the echo of their heavy steps. The alien warrior had been standing before the Civil War display for 20 minutes, their 4 eyes fixed on a painting of Gettysburg. Let me understand this correctly, Croffax said, their lower arms twitching. These soldiers, these Confederates and Union forces, they were all from the same species, the same nation. Lieutenant Hayes nodded, standing beside the towering alien. Brothers fighting brothers, families torn apart. The American Civil War lasted 4 years, with over 600,000 deaths. Some families had members fighting on both sides. But why? All 4 of Croffax's eyes turned to her. The Vorkath have never experienced internal conflict on this scale. Minor disputes, yes, but this? They gestured to the display. This is beyond comprehension. Major Anderson stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. That's just one of our civil conflicts. Would you like to see something from World War II? The Eastern Front. Before Croffax could respond, Hayes activated the museum's holographic display. The air filled with a 3-dimensional recreation of the Battle of Stalingrad. Burning buildings, snow-covered streets, and endless lines of soldiers materialized around them. 900 days, Hayes said quietly. Nearly 2 million casualties in just this one city. Croffax's trophy chain rattled as they stepped back, their upper arms raised in what the humans now recognized as a defensive posture. This level of combat, the resources required, the sheer determination. And while this was happening, Anderson added, gesturing to another display, we were fighting in the Pacific, in North Africa, in Western Europe. Multiple fronts, multiple strategies, all at once. The alien warrior moved between the displays with growing agitation. Their claws left light scratches on their own armor as they tried to process the information. Your species, Croffax said, their voice unsteady, you fight like this against others, against your own kind. Simultaneously. When we have to, Hayes replied. She pulled up another hologram, this one showing the global scale of World War II. Here's something that might interest you. The concept of total war. Croffax watched as the hologram demonstrated how entire societies transformed for the war effort. Factories converting to produce weapons, civilian population mobilizing, resources being redirected on a global scale. Your entire civilization. Croffax's translator crackled with emotion. It becomes a war machine. When necessary, Anderson confirmed. But that's not what makes humans unique in combat. The alien's head tilted. What could be more significant than this? Hayes changed the display again, this time showing the aftermath of various conflicts. What makes us different is how we adapt. Every war teaches us something new. Every conflict forces us to evolve our tactics, our technology, our understanding. Croffax moved closer to the new images, their trophy chain now eerily silent. The Vorkath pride ourselves on maintaining our traditional combat methods. We have used the same successful strategies for generations. And that's why you've never lost, Anderson said, his voice carrying a weight that made the alien turn all 4 eyes toward him. But it's also why you've never truly been tested. You sound like you believe your species would be a match for the Vorkath Dominion. There was a challenge in Krathax's voice, but also something else. Uncertainty. Major Anderson is being diplomatic, Hayes interjected, pulling up one final display. A timeline of human military history. We're not interested in finding out who would win in a conflict. We're more interested in making sure we never have to find out. The alien warriors stared at the timeline, their eyes moving rapidly between different eras. This is just your military history, just the major conflicts. Just the documented ones, Hayes confirmed, and only going back a few thousand years. Krathax's upper arms reached for their trophy chain, running their claws over the 47 pieces of metal. For the first time since their arrival, the gesture seemed less like pride and more like nervous habit. I think, the alien said finally, their voice barely above a whisper, I need to send a message to my superiors. They need to know what I'm learning here. Anderson and Hayes exchanged knowing looks as Krathax continued to stare at the displays, the alien's confidence visibly crumbling with each new piece of information. At 3 a.m, the library at West Point should have been empty, yet the soft glow of computer screens illuminated the massive form of Krathax, hunched over multiple displays. Their trophy chain lay discarded on a nearby table, forgotten hours ago. Major Anderson found them there, surrounded by digital archives of Vietnam War tactics. All 4 of the aliens' eyes were bloodshot from continuous reading, their claws making soft clicking sounds against the keyboards. Couldn't sleep? Anderson asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee, one regular, one modified for Vorkath biology. How? Krathax didn't look up. How did your forces maintain combat effectiveness in these conditions? The terrain was against them. The local population was hostile. Their supply lines were stretched thin. And yet, Anderson pulled up a chair, reinforced to handle Vorkath weight. You've been at this for 16 hours straight. Maybe you should take a break. Impossible. All 4 eyes remained fixed on the screens. Your species, you created new forms of combat I never imagined. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric combat, psychological operations. Their upper arms gestured at different displays. The Vorkath would have simply overwhelmed such resistance with superior numbers. But these tactics, they made superior numbers nearly irrelevant. That's what happens when you're often the underdog, Anderson said, sipping his coffee. You learn to adapt or you don't survive. Krathax finally turned to face him. The Vorkath have never been the underdog. We've always been the superior force. Always. And that's why you've never had to truly innovate, Anderson replied. Innovation often comes from necessity. The alien warrior's lower arms trembled slightly as they reached for their modified coffee. I've been reading about something called the Cold War. A war without direct combat. A war of knowledge and fear and careful balance. The concept is terrifying. Mutually assured destruction, Anderson nodded. Sometimes the greatest victories come from battles never fought. Your species created weapons that could destroy entire cities, then chose not to use them. Krathax's translator crackled with disbelief. The Vorkath would have used them immediately. Anderson finished. And that's the difference. Sometimes the greatest show of strength is in showing restraint. Krathax turned back to the screens, their claws moving to pull up new files. These reports, Special Forces operations, covert missions, intelligence warfare. The complexity of your military theory is beyond anything in the Vorkath archives. Lieutenant Hayes will be here in a few hours. She can help you understand the evolution of these tactics. No, Krathax said, their voice uncharacteristically quiet. I need to keep reading. Every time I think I understand the depth of human military capability, I find another layer. They pulled up a new file. Did you know your species has created theoretical frameworks for combat against threats that don't even exist yet? Anderson smiled slightly. Contingency planning is a human specialty. The Vorkath plan for victory, Krothax said, almost to themselves. Humans plan for everything. Victory, defeat, stalemate, unconventional threats, unknown enemies. They paused, all four eyes widening. You even have plans for fighting your own hypothetical time-traveling forces. Like I said, we try to be thorough. Krothax's upper arms reached for their discarded trophy chain, but stopped halfway. 47 conquered worlds. It seemed like such an achievement yesterday. Now, they looked at Anderson. Your species has never left your planet for war, yet you have more battle experience than the entire Vorkath military history. That's not something we're proud of, Anderson said quietly. Each of those conflicts came with a terrible cost. A cost you remember, Krothax noted, pulling up images of war memorials. You build monuments not to victory, but to loss. To learning. Too, they struggled with the concept. To peace. Anderson stood, placing a hand on the alien's armored shoulder. Get some rest, Krothax. Tomorrow, we'll show you something even more important than our capacity for war. But the alien warrior was already pulling up new files, their eyes fixed on the screens with a mix of horror and fascination. The trophy chain remained forgotten on the table, its significance diminishing with each new discovery. The Marine Corps Urban Warfare Training Center stretched out before them, a maze of concrete buildings and twisted metal. Lieutenant Hayes stood with Krothax in the observation tower, while Major Anderson coordinated the exercise below. This is just practice, Krothax asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The alien hadn't slept in 3 days, all four eyes showing signs of exhaustion. Just training. Watch, Hayes said, gesturing to the scene below. The morning sun cast long shadows as 2 platoons of Marines began their exercise. Smoke grenades filled the streets with rolling gray clouds. The sharp cracks of training rounds echoed off buildings, while Marines moved like ghosts through windows and doorways. Your warriors. Krothax's upper arms gripped the railing. They're fighting in 3 dimensions. Vertical combat, horizontal engagement, underground movement, all simultaneously. Urban combat is complex, Hayes explained. The environment is always changing. Every window could hide a threat. Every door could be trapped. Every civilian could be an enemy or an innocent. The alien warrior's lower arms began to tremble. The Vorkath would simply level such structures, clear the battlefield of obstacles. And that's why you've never had to learn these skills, Hayes said. Sometimes the harder path makes you stronger. Below, a Marine squad executed a perfect breach and clear operation, moving through a building with practiced precision. Their movements were like a deadly dance, each soldier knowing their role without a word being spoken. How? Krothax's translator crackled with emotion. How many combat hours does it take to achieve this level of coordination? These Marines, Hayes checked her tablet, average of 2 years of training, but they're building on centuries of urban combat experience, lessons written in blood from places like Stalingrad, Hue City, Fallujah. The alien warrior suddenly staggered back from the railing. Their trophy chain, which they'd started wearing again that morning, caught the sunlight as they stumbled. Krothax. Hayes moved to support them, concerned. Are you all right? The Battle of the Somme, they said, their voice shaking. I read about it last night. 1 day, 1 single day of combat. The casualties. Nearly 20,000 dead in the first day, Hayes confirmed quietly. The Vorkath. Krothax's legs gave out, and they sank to their knees. In our entire military history, across all 47 conquered worlds, we have never lost that many warriors. Total. In all campaigns combined. Below, the exercise continued. Marines moved like water through the urban terrain, adapting to each new challenge, overcoming each obstacle. War never changes, Hayes said, quoting the old maxim, but warriors do. We learn, we adapt, we evolve. Your species, Cruthax's 4 eyes fixed on her, filled with something between awe and terror. You're not just warriors. You're combat philosophers. You don't just fight wars, you study them, analyze them, transform them into something new. A massive explosion below signaled the end of the exercise. Marines emerged from the smoke, checking their equipment, critiquing their performance, already planning how to improve. The Vorkath, Cruthax's voice, was barely audible. We think we're the greatest warriors in the galaxy because we've never lost a battle. But your species has lost thousands of battles, millions of warriors, and each loss taught you something new. Hayes helped the alien warrior to their feet. There's an old human saying, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. Cruthax reached up and slowly removed their trophy chain. Looking at it now, the 47 pieces seemed less like symbols of glory and more like marks of ignorance. I need to send another message to High Command, they said, their voice finding new strength. They need to understand what I've learned here. The Vorkath. We're not the greatest warriors in the galaxy. We're children playing at war, never understanding its true nature. Hayes watched as the Marines below began their after-action review, learning from every mistake, growing stronger with every lesson. Come on, she said gently. Major Anderson wants to show you something even more important than our capacity for war. What could be more important than this? Our capacity for peace, Hayes replied, leading the shaken warrior toward the stairs. And the price we paid to learn its value. Cruthax sat alone in their temporary quarters at Fort Bragg, the room's light dimmed to accommodate their sensitive eyes. The trophy chain lay coiled on the desk like a discarded snake, while multiple holographic screens floated before them, each displaying different aspects of human military history. Priority communication to Vorkath High Command. They spoke into their neural transmitter. Security level alpha. Reference. Earth assessment update. The screens around them flickered, showing everything from ancient Roman legion formations to modern special forces tactics. Their claws moved through the air, organizing the information they'd gathered. Honored commanders, Cruthax began, their voice steady despite their inner turmoil. I must revise my initial assessment of Earth's military capabilities. Previous reports have been dangerously inadequate. They pulled up footage from the morning's urban combat exercise, playing it alongside historical battle records. The humans are not simply warriors. They are not merely soldiers. They are something we have never encountered before. A species that has made warfare into an art form, a science, and a philosophy. Their upper arms gestured to different displays, recording every detail for the transmission. In the past week, I have learned of conflicts that dwarf our greatest campaigns. The humans fight wars that span generations. They wage battles that would exhaust our entire military in a single day. But that is not what makes them truly dangerous. Cruthax paused, all 4 eyes focusing on an image of Arlington National Cemetery. What makes them dangerous is their ability to learn. Every defeat teaches them new tactics. Every victory shows them new weaknesses. They fight against themselves with the same ferocity they would show any external enemy, constantly evolving, constantly adapting. The alien warriors' lower arms trembled as they continued. The Vorkath pride ourselves on never retreating, never surrendering. The humans, they have turned retreat into a strategy, surrender into a tactical option. They have taken every rule of combat we hold sacred and found ways to turn those rules against their enemies. New screens appeared, showing psychological warfare techniques, guerrilla tactics, and economic combat strategies. They fight with their bodies, their minds, their resources, their information. They have weapons that can destroy cities, yet they choose not to use them, not out of weakness, but because they understand something we don't. The true power of restraint. Krafax's translator crackled with emotion as they reached the core of their message. High Command, I must be direct. If the Vorkath were to enter conflict with Earth, our traditional tactics would be worse than useless. They would be predictable. Every strategy we've used to conquer 47 worlds is already documented in their military archives, analyzed, and countered. They gestured to their discarded trophy chain. My honors feel hollow now. We have been fighting children, High Command. Easy victories against developing worlds. But these humans, they have been fighting themselves for millennia. They have more combat experience against themselves than we have against all other species combined. The screens around them began to show casualty figures from major human conflicts. I recommend an immediate revaluation of Earth's threat level, not because they are aggressive, though they are capable of aggression beyond our understanding, but because they are something far more dangerous. They are innovative. Krafax's upper arms moved to their chest in the traditional salute. Furthermore, I recommend a complete overhaul of Vorkath military doctrine. We must learn from them, adapt as they have adapted, or risk becoming obsolete in a galaxy that contains such formidable potential adversaries. They paused again, all four eyes closing briefly. Final note. The humans have a saying. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We must learn, High Command. We must change, or the next trophy chain that falls might be our own. As Krafax ended the transmission, their gaze fell on tomorrow's schedule. A visit to a place called Arlington National Cemetery. Major Anderson had said it would show them something more important than human military might. The alien warrior wondered what could possibly be more significant than everything they'd already learned. But given how wrong they'd been about everything else, they were starting to expect the unexpected. The morning fog rolled between the white headstones of Arlington National Cemetery, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. Krafax moved slowly behind Major Anderson and Lieutenant Hayes, their massive frames seeming somehow smaller among the endless rows of markers. How many? The alien asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Over 400,000 rest here, Hayes replied softly. Service members, veterans, and their families. Each stone tells a story. Krafax's four eyes moved from stone to stone, their translator working to convert the dates and inscriptions. These are not monuments to victory. No, Anderson said, leading them down another row. They're reminders of the cost. Every generation of my family has someone buried here. My great-grandfather from World War II, my uncle from Vietnam. They stopped at a particular section, where the headstones were newer, the earth still settling. The Vorkath, Krafax said, their lower arms trembling slightly. We build monuments to our victories, statues of our greatest warriors. But this, they gestured at the endless fields of white. This is different. Come with me, Hayes said, leading them to another section. There's something you need to see. They approached the tomb of the unknown soldier, where the guard performed their eternal watch. Krafax watched in silence as the soldier executed their precise movements, each step a testament to dedication and respect. I don't understand, the alien said finally. You guard an empty tomb. Not empty, Anderson corrected. It contains the remains of unknown soldiers, those who gave everything, even their identity, in service. Krafax's upper arms lowered in what the humans now recognized as a sign of deep respect. You honor even those whose names you don't know. Every life matters, Hayes said. Every loss leaves a void. That's something the Vorthak haven't had to learn yet. They watched the changing of the guard in silence. Krafax's trophy chain, which they'd brought at Anderson's request, felt heavy in their lower hands. "There's something else you should know," Anderson said finally. "Something about human warriors that might surprise you even more than our capacity for combat." He pulled out his phone and showed Crothax a historical photo. The aliens' 4 eyes focused on the image, their head tilting in confusion. "This is wrong," they said. "These soldiers, they're celebrating together, but they wear different uniforms." "The Christmas truce of 1914, Hayes explained. "In the middle of one of the bloodiest wars in human history, soldiers from both sides laid down their arms to celebrate a holiday together. They sang songs, shared food, even played soccer." Crothax's translator crackled with emotion. "They stopped fighting to play games with their enemies because they recognized each other's humanity," Anderson said. "Even in the midst of war, we're capable of seeing our enemies as people." The alien warrior looked down at their trophy chain, each link representing a world conquered, a people subjugated. "The Vorkath would consider this weakness." "That's why you've never lost a battle," Hayes said gently. "And that's why you've never really understood war or peace." Crothax moved to the edge of the cemetery, looking out over the endless rows of white stones disappearing into the morning mist. "Your species, you're not just the greatest warriors we've ever encountered. You're also the greatest peacekeepers," Anderson finished, "because we know the true cost of war. Every stone here is a lesson, a reminder." The aliens' 4 eyes closed briefly. "My message to High Command. They responded this morning. They called me a coward, said I had been corrupted by human weakness." "And what do you think?" Hayes asked. Crothax opened their eyes, looking at the trophy chain in their lower hands. With a swift movement, they snapped it in half, the 47 links scattering across the holy ground. "I think," they said, their voice finding new strength, "that it's time for the Vorkath to learn some human weakness." Above them, the morning sun finally broke through the fog, illuminating the fields of Arlington in golden light. Among the stones, an alien warrior learned the hardest lesson of all. True strength lies not in the wars you win, but in the peace you keep. The Vorkath High Command chamber loomed before Crothax, its ancient walls adorned with trophies from 1,000 victories. Supreme Commander Vexthor stood at the center, their battle armor gleaming with the medals of 40 campaigns. "You dare return after such cowardice?" Vexthor's voice boomed through the chamber. "Your reports from Earth speak of weakness, of fear." Behind Crothax stood Major Anderson and Lieutenant Hayes, invited as Earth's representatives. The human officers remained silent, watching as their friends stepped forward. "I challenge you, Supreme Commander," Crothax declared, their voice clear and strong. "By ancient right of combat leadership." A murmur rippled through the assembled Vorkath warriors. The right of combat leadership hadn't been invoked in 10 generations. "You would fight me?" Vexthor laughed, the sound like thunder. "You, who speaks of human weakness?" "I would fight you," Crothax confirmed, moving to the central combat ring. "And I will show you what true strength looks like." The Supreme Commander's trophy chain rattled as they stepped into the ring, all 4 arms brandishing traditional Vorkath weapons. "Then die with your human philosophies." Anderson and Hayes watched as the 2 warriors circled each other. Vexthor attacked first, their movement pattern following the classic Vorkath combat form. Direct, powerful, predictable. Crothax didn't meet the attack head-on. Instead, they moved like water, like the Marines in urban combat training, using the environment and their opponent's momentum against them. "Fight like a Vorkath," Vexthor roared, their attacks growing more aggressive. "I fight like someone who has learned," Crothax replied, ducking under a swing and countering with a move they'd seen in ancient Roman wrestling manuals. The battle continued, Vexthor's traditional power meeting Crothax's adapted style. When the Supreme Commander charged, Crothax used Aikido principles to redirect the force. When trapped, they employed Marine Corps close combat techniques. "Look at them," Hayes whispered to Anderson. "They're using everything they learned." "Not just the combat moves," Anderson replied. "Watch their strategy." Indeed, Krethax wasn't fighting to destroy their opponent. Each move was calculated, each technique chosen to demonstrate rather than devastate. Finally, after what seemed like hours, an opening appeared. Vexthor, exhausted from their aggressive style, left their lower guard exposed. Krethax struck, not with a killing blow, but with a precise hit that sent the Supreme Commander to their knees. The chamber fell silent as Krethax stood over their fallen leader, all four arms poised for the final strike. But they didn't strike. Instead, Krethax extended a hand to help Vexthor up. "This is your human weakness," Vexthor spat. "This is human strength," Krethax replied. "The strength to show mercy, to learn from enemies, to change." They turned to address the assembled warriors. "I have seen how humans fight. Their weapons could turn our worlds to ash. Their tactics could break our armies. Their strategies could dismantle our empire." A nervous murmur ran through the crowd. "But I had also seen how they make peace, how they honor their fallen, how they turn enemies into allies. And that," Krethax's voice filled the chamber, "that is true power." Vexthor slowly rose, their four eyes fixed on their opponent. "You fight, unlike any Vorkath I have ever seen. Because I fight like someone who has learned that victory without understanding is empty." The Supreme Commander was silent for a long moment. Then, in a move that shocked the assembly, they removed their trophy chain. "Teach us," Vexthor said simply. 1 year later, the first Vorkath Peace Academy opened its doors. Major Anderson and Lieutenant Hayes stood as honored instructors, teaching alongside Krethax. Young warriors learned not just how to fight, but when not to fight. They studied human history not just for its battles, but for its moments of reconciliation and peace. And in the Academy's central hall, a broken trophy chain hung in a display case. Beneath it, a simple inscription read, "Sometimes the greatest victory is learning to see through your enemy's eyes." The Vorkath would never be the same, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all.